Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Modern Integrated Data Protection Against Ransomware in Your Lenovo Data Center. This event is brought to you in partnership with Veeam. Thank you so much for joining us on this Happy Friday webinar. Great to have you on the event today. We've got a great presentation lined up. Before I introduce you to the expert presenter on today's webinar, just first a few things that you should know. If you haven't been on one of these webinars before, I should mention, I guess, my name is David Davis of Actual Tech Media, and I'll be serving as the moderator. We want this to be educational, as we do with all of our events at Actual Tech Media. We encourage your questions. There's the questions panel in your audience console. I can call your attention to it that way. And we'll be doing a dedicated Q&A at the end of the event. Experts from Veeam are standing by. We also have, of course, a link to veeam.com for more information on the Veeam solution that you'll learn about on the webinar today. It's right there in your handouts tab. And then finally, at the end of the webinar, I'll be announcing the winner of our Amazon $300 gift card. That prize is only eligible to those who attend the event live. So if you're watching this on demand, of course, the drawing has already occurred. And the prize terms that you'll have to meet are in the handouts tab. All prize winners must be able to submit an IRS Form W-9 to Actual Tech Media. And with that, it's time to get this webinar started. I'm excited to introduce Mr. Ronn Martin, Senior Global Solutions Architect at Veeam. Ron, it's great to have you. Take it away.
Hey, thanks, David. On behalf of Veeam and Lenovo, I want to thank you for joining today. We appreciate your time. My purpose today is twofold. One is to show the integration intersection between Veeam and Lenovo, the Veeam software and the Lenovo software and hardware. And then I also want to focus a little on the more recent, I guess, feature set that we've introduced through VBR, particularly with an emphasis on some of the new capabilities that we've added with V11. So with that, let's go ahead and jump right in. The first thing I want to take you through is some new capability we give you on the immutability front. Now, if you've followed Veeam and you've seen our evolution, we've evolved our protection capabilities as ransomware threats have evolved. So if you go back a couple releases within Veeam, we want to make sure that that your data is absolutely safe. Of course, we've always supported tape, and tape gives you the ultimate air gap sort of capability against ransomware. With one of the later releases of our 9.5 product, we actually introduced support for worm tape. So tape that actually has hardware write once, read many capabilities built into that. We added that with 9.5. About a year ago, with our version 10 release, we added another tier of immutability for S3 targets, so that if your S3 target supported it, we were actually able to make those those objects in those S3 buckets immutable for some period of time as well. And with V11, we're actually extending this to the disk tier. So particularly with an eye toward what we do with Lenovo, for Lenovo, DE is a great backup storage target for us. Also, of course, you could use direct attached storage like with one of the Lenovo JBOD solutions. But again, we're adding this new disk level immutability to the product, so that you can have immutability at really what we call the performance tier, the capacity tier in S3, and then an offline tier with worm tape. So the actual terminology you'll see from Veeam is a hardened Linux backup repository, which, as it certainly says in the title, is Linux based. So we only are supporting Linux based repositories with this new immutable capability. And the idea is really that we want to give you a malware safe disk level repository, both from ransomware threats, but also from either accidental or malicious insiders as well. And the way we implement it is actually pretty straightforward. We take advantage of the immutability capabilities within the Linux file system. We do recommend, there are other Linux file system types which give you immutability. However, we do recommend XFS for reasons we'll talk about later relative to the full backup requirements that this repository creates. But effectively, the backup can't be changed during the immutability period, so it's safe from say from accidental or intentional deletion. In terms of the components we require for Linux repositories, we support both 32 and 64-bit server platforms for generic Linux repositories. However, for the hardened Linux repository, we'll only support a 64-bit. The package requirements are pretty light. Well, we need Bash shell, of course. For deployment purposes, we need SSH. We'll go into that in more detail in just a moment. And we do need Perl and some additional Perl modules that are defined in Help Center on the Veeam website. We do, again, highly recommend the XFS file system. And for those 5 distributions that are listed there, the other distributions with XFS are considered experimental, so not explicitly supported, but probably work properly. And then we also require a non-root user account that does have elevation privilege, again, at least for the initial deployment. So from a overall architecture perspective, it's a pretty simple proposition, right? So we have the Veeam server, we add the Linux repository in more or less the same fashion that if you've added a Linux repository to Veeam, that you've done it in the past. And then we need some XFS formatted file system, whether that's backed by direct attached storage or DE storage. DE storage will be our preference, but it ultimately doesn't matter to the hardened Linux repository. And then in terms of firewall security, we do need SSH inbound for the initial deployment, but then post deployment that could potentially be turned off, and we would only need one single port inbound to the server, again, to help with the security posture of the repository. So then from a configuration perspective, so the trade-off is always, if security and convenience, it's not as convenient to create a hardened Linux repository, but it's a way more secure. And the setup is really all up front. I mean, there's no real ongoing maintenance that you have to engage in. So from a configuration perspective, it's, firstly, you'll need to, create a volume, mount a volume, and format it with XFS for the repository on your Linux server. We have seen some posts in the forum where, people are just trying to point this to, any Linux server they have with some attached storage. And that's really not the idea. We do want this to be kind of a purpose-built approach for the hardened repository. We do need a unprivileged Linux user with elevation privilege, which will then create, once your XFS file system is mounted, we'll create a backup folder and set some permissions there. And then from the VBR side, we simply add the hardened repository with that user account. Once you say add from the Veeam side, we're actually going to deploy all the components we need. This is unlike what you're used to seeing with prior revisions of our Linux repository, in that we're not dynamically rolling the data mover down to the Linux host each time. The data mover is actually persistent, on the host, and you can actually see, I have a screenshot down here, the services that run, and then once you're done, you can actually remove the elevate to root permissions for that user account that you've created. And then from the VBR side, it again looks almost identical to the normal Linux repository creation process. We just add 2 additional checkboxes here to use XFS. Again, we recommend that. And then we also have this checkbox for making the backups immutable for some period of time. In this case, just a week. I chose 7 days for this particular backup job. But again, all the other elements to the repository creation wizard are identical within VBR. So then at operation time, the transport service, the data movement actually just runs in the ordinary user account context that you've created. What's different is, and if you think back to the prior slide, there's an Immu repo daemon that runs, and that daemon actually runs as root, and that's what is responsible responsible. That's the process that's responsible for setting and removing the immutability flag. Once the immutability period is over. So a couple things relative to your backup jobs for the Hardened Linux repository is one, for image level backups, for your ordinary Veeam backups that everybody's used to doing. We don't allow, for obvious reasons, merge operations. So say you were running a forever forward chain for 2 weeks or a month. If you're saying run for 2 weeks, on day 15, you know what happens. The oldest increment is then merged into that full. So the oldest VIB is merged into your VBK. Well, if both of those files are immutable, particularly if the initial full is immutable, that's not going to happen. The merge operations are going to fail. So you do have to do periodic, either synthetic or active fulls with the Hardened Linux repository. And again, this goes back to our recommendation for the XFS file system. Is if you're not familiar with our block, with us being able to leverage block cloning technology, synthetic fulls are effectively pointer manipulations. We're not actually synthesizing and creating a fully populated backup file. It's effectively, a pointer operation to create that synthetic full, which again is our is behind of our recommendation for XFS. You can target other backup job types at a Hardened Linux repository, but for immutability purposes, those backup types will not be supported. So if you're doing NAS backup, if you're doing HANA backup or RMAN backup for Oracle, those jobs are not supported relative to the immutability. So again, from a practice perspective, we recommend, and obviously there are multiple ways to do this, but use a single use account when you create the Linux repository. Once you've actually completed that initial deployment, you can actually disable SSH. Now, this assumes that you would have, of course, physical access to the host, or, possibly some out of band access to the host like ILO or DRAC. But, again, we want, not only for you to consider the software level security, but also, to prevent from malicious insiders, the physical access to the server. So if you've chopped it down so that you only allow port 61, 62 inbound, users can't log in with SSH, we think you're going to be extraordinarily safe. Now, it does go without saying, if I can get root access to that host. Root can do whatever it wants. So for instance, the Immu root repository service runs as root, and root can change the immutability flags. So if you can get to the server and become root, then yes, you can change it. So we want to prevent, again, by locking down, remote, SSH, locking down physical access, to basically make the Hardened Linux repository as secure as possible. And then you also do, I just wanted to mention, there is a PowerShell mechanism for extending legal hold style immutability. So if you, for instance, my current backup chain is immutable for 7 days. If you remember the screenshot, if I wanted to extend that to 60 days or 30 days or something, I could actually dynamically do that and affect that with PowerShell. So I wanted to do just a quick demo, just to give you an idea of how the operation looks for the immutable Linux repository. So from a VBR server perspective, again, the Hardened repository looks more or less just like an ordinary Linux repository, with the primary difference being that repository definition. So the primary difference is that with this repository type, this option is the new one. So I make the backups immutable for some number of days. I can enable flash cloning, et cetera. That's the primary difference in doing the setup process. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel that. But then from the Linux perspective, so I want to show just a couple things here. Let me flip over to my putty session. So in this case, you'll see that I'm my kind of the one-time use, the ordinary VBR user. So in my case, I've mounted the repository. If I just did an lslr as a mount and then VBR repo, then you'll see here's the backup job that I've run from the VBR server, and then my full, and then the increments that have run so far. Or similarly, if I want to see the mutability attributes, I can do an ls adder /mount/ and you'll notice that on all of these backups, the immutability flag is set, so that even as VBR user, if I tried to do, an RM, /mount. Oh, yes, you can tell this is a live demo, right? So, let's do it. Let's do it a more fun way. So if I tried to delete those, obviously I can't, because they're immutable. Even if I tried to do, sudo, and let me enter the password. And in my case, what I've done is I've followed our recommendations. Once the deployment steps are completed, I've removed the SU, the sudo capability from VBR user. So I can't even delete these as the actually owner of these files. Or similarly, if I chose to log in as another user that did have Elevate permissions, so if I tried to do that same thing, let me just copy that, and it's going to ask me for elevation, and in my case I am able to elevate, but I'm still not able to remove those files because they are set to immutable. So in any case, I hope that was helpful, and I would definitely encourage you to check out the new hardened Linux capability. So again, that you can have that level of protection at the disk level. So a couple other things relative to Veeam operation in your Lenovo data center. I did mention tape a couple times already, and tape is still really in my mind the ultimate air gap for ransomware defense, and tape is not dead. So tape continues to evolve. In fact, later this year, IBM will ship LTO9. So the LTO9 specification is a raw capacity of a single tape is 18 terabytes with maybe 40, 45 terabytes compressed. So a tape is continuing to evolve. Tape is certainly not dead. And in fact, V11, which we just shipped, has already been tested against some early builds of the earlier builds of LTO9, and will be validated once the LTO9 ships. So again, as we've evolved to support worm tape, we've also added a couple new capabilities that we think you might be interested in with tape for V11. So with V11, one of the things that we've added is tape cloning. So for instance, if I wanted to copy, take an older backup that's on tape, maybe it's LTO6 sort of media. Maybe I've already migrated to LTO7 or 8. Drive types, or maybe when we get to LTO9, I can take those old Veeam tapes and copy them to the new media. For tape consolidation, for an extra copy purpose, for additional protection, et cetera. Or if I'm worried that the old tapes are kind of reaching their end of life, again, I can create new copies, create fresh media, and do all that. So again, a pretty handy new feature for V11. One thing to note is that we don't. We only support our own tape formats, our normal backups, file to tape, and NDMP. The three primary tape formats that we currently support. We only support. We're not a clone technology for other tape types, right? It does require at least 2 drives. So obviously you have to have the old media and the new media in a drive simultaneously. And there's really no scheduler for this. If you want to do any automation around this, certainly we make PowerShell available. But again, this is just a capability that we provide so that you can create either secondary copies or migrate from older LTO formats. The other thing that we've added, and it's a small thing, but just so you're aware, particularly if you're running like a POC, experimenting with Veeam tape support, is we can actually put the library rescans in what we call maintenance mode, so that if you're already using some other third-party tape software, we can effectively, hibernate our tape server so that it's not, definitely it wouldn't be, there would be no chance it would be interfering with any other operations that you would be running on the tape side. So I want to switch gears just a bit and segue from both the protection angle, where we want to make sure that your data is protected, that it's resilient, to more some of the enhancements that we've built around incident recovery. So we have a lot of those sorts of capabilities in the product historically. So for instance, instant VM recovery. Instant VM recovery, if you're not familiar with it, we're flattered that a lot of our competitors are copying this, but instant VM recovery is a way to recover a workload without actually rehydrating the workload. So we effectively boot the VM from its backup data, and this is where again our partnership with Lenovo comes into play, because all backup storage is not created equal. So, for instance, as you might imagine, in those sorts of scenarios, if I'm actually running the VM from a backup, I need some fairly performant backup storage. And this again, where Lenovo DE comes into play, because it's very, very good from a random read perspective, which is what we need for doing instant VM recovery. We've also had a capability in the product for a long time. We've called this several things, but we've settled on data labs currently. And what data labs let you do is take the instant VM recovery capabilities to the next level. So particularly with a ransomware recovery scenario in mind, what you're able to do with data labs is, using the underlying instant VM recovery capability, you're able to boot a set of VMs up that you predefine, but boot them up in network isolation. So, for instance, if you would have an incident, a breach, and you want to find that last known good backup before the infection occurred, with something like Data Labs, you're able to actually boot those VMs up safely because they're network isolated. They can't infect anything else in production, and go back and find those that last known good. So just a couple capabilities that we've had historically. So there are a couple new capabilities I wanted to draw your attention to that we've put in place with V11 to again let you do these more targeted sorts of recovery operations. So in the first case, a database. So in the case of Oracle and SQL, we've added this instant recovery sort of capability for Oracle and SQL databases. So the idea is, the same as if you're used to running instant VM recovery or instant VM disk recovery within your current Veeam environment. This also gives you the same capability at the database level for Oracle and SQL. So the way it works is, again, very similar to how we do instant VM recovery. We present effectively the database files themselves via an iSCSI LUN or simulated LUN to the database server. So the database server, it crashes, it craters, your primary storage fails for whatever reason. We're able to actually publish from the backup file, from the backup format, the database files that it needs to be up and running. And then of course we keep a write cache local on the server so that we can record everything that's happening while the database is up and live. And then while that's happening, ostensibly you would be recovering your primary storage and then running the restore from your backup. So that then once that was completed and primary storage is up, it was recovered with the data from your backups. Then we can actually run a synchronization. So we can synchronize all of the writes that have happened during the time you're running in instant recovery mode back to those the live database, or what will become the live database files on your production storage. And then during switchover, it's simply a matter of stopping and restarting the database. So we stop the database, we unmount the emulated files, and then we switch over to, I think my animation was broken, I apologize there, to the database files that are on production. So again, just another tool in your toolbox for doing recovery in the event of some sort of breach or failure. The other capability that we were adding with V11, relative to particularly Lenovo DM, and say you have running DM and you have NAS presentation, you have SMB shares or NFS shares that you're presenting from from NAS on DM. With V10, we of course built a NAS backup capability into VBR, so that we're able to back up NFS and SMB shares. And so with V11, we've also created this capability around, if your NAS goes down, it's offline, well, or if it's infected for whatever reason, it needs to be taken down. We're actually able to publish again from the backup a mount that users can get to to present all of their NAS data. And in this case, it is SMB only and it is read only. So that we don't actually support NFS in this first iteration. But if you need to get your users back up and online quickly, then you get to their SMB shares. We can instantly publish those from the backup as well. And then again, the same process. We can, if the primary NAS data has been corrupted in some way, we can restore from the backup simultaneous to the presentation of the NAS folder for temporary purposes, and then users can be on their way. So, if I talk about instant VM recovery and instant database recovery and instant NAS recovery, these are, in my mind, more targeted approaches to a recovery scenario. We also have a capability within the Veeam product portfolio, which we previously referred to as Veeam Availability Orchestrator. We now refer to as Veeam Disaster Recovery Orchestrator. And so this actually takes the capabilities up a notch to include things like, automated application level testing and verification, full, DR orchestration plans, bring up app A, bring up app B, and all the affiliated VMs, in some orchestrated manner, and also actually gives you the capability to create what we call dynamic documentation, where we can actually spit out the documentation for your disaster recovery plan for auditors or other sorts of purposes. And the way that VAO or VDRO now has evolved over time is initially it was only for orchestrating Veeam replication. So if I replicated my VMware VMs to a DR site, a DR host, we could orchestrate how those VMs came up and ran. And then with the version, I believe 3 product of VDRO, we added the capability to recover from backup as well. So in this case, using instant VM recovery to go ahead and include those in your orchestration plans. So it wasn't limited to just your replicated VMs. We also included backups. And now with version 4, we've actually further integrated it with Lenovo and DM, in that if you're running DM and ONTAP and you're doing SnapMirror, SnapVault replication to your recovery site, not only can we recover from replicas, Veeam stage replicas and Veeam stage backups, but we can also actually recover from SnapMirror, SnapVault snapshots as well in the same way. So again, it's kind of this progression of from tactical and application level or VM level clear up to full application suite, full recovery sorts of capabilities. So there were also a couple new features that we wanted to talk about, and these were particular for V11, really designed to streamline the administration process from the Veeam side for what we do with Lenovo DM and ONTAP. The first one was, you can think of it as universal kind of storage registration. So if I have a DM series, I attach my DM series to my Veeam server, I register my Veeam, register my DM storage, then I'm actually able to also define what scenarios that I want to support from that DM storage. So is it supplying file or block storage for vSphere? Is it also a NAS filer? Am I going to be able to want to do NAS backup through it? And a new capability, which we'll talk about momentarily, is being able to do some backup for block storage for Windows servers then as well. But it goes without saying, I can register all of that capability within one place for DM and ONTAP. For NAS backup, we've also actually made it much simpler to administer, in that, once I create my server, then I'm actually able to add, instead of with V10, I had to go in and add each file share that I wanted to back up to its own file server entity within the VBR console. Now, with the integration that we've done for DM with version 11, I'm actually able to specify those at a higher level. So I'm, from the cluster level to the clear down to the volume level, and of course to the file share level, like we could before. But this of course greatly simplifies scenarios where I have lots of file shares that I want to be able to basically back up as a group. And the nice thing is, we'll actually let you back up, mix. If you have NFS and SMB shares within a particular volume, it doesn't matter. We'll back those both up, and not have to create separate SMB and NFS jobs. So just again makes the backup capability for NAS much more seamless. The other thing that we've done specific to ONTAP is automate the backup from storage snapshot. So if you're familiar with Veeam NAS backup, in the case where a file is locked while we're running our NAS backup, we'll retry it a couple times. But if it remains locked for an extended period of time, that file won't be backed up during that particular session. We'll have to pick that up in a subsequent session. We can overcome that by backing up from a storage snapshot. So in the case of ONTAP, we've completely automated this so that this is something you don't have to set up as the backup administrator. It's automatically going to do this. I mean, if you don't want it to do this for whatever reason, and I can't imagine what those would be, then you'd have to explicitly disable this in the registry on your VBR server. But again, this will take care of any issues that you might have with locked files during your NAS backup processing. And then the other brand new capability I wanted to highlight that is a new integration for DM and ONTAP is backup for Windows Server. Now the idea is, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a physical Windows Server. It could be any Windows Server with an attached DM LUN. So that in this case we've taken what we've traditionally done for VM backups, that is where we're able to back up from a storage snapshot, and we've applied that to the agent. So say you have a physical Windows server, you have a Veeam agent running on it, you have some direct attached storage obviously within the server, but then also some fiber channel or iSCSI LUNs that are attached from DM. What we're able to do is, of course, the direct attached storage will still back up through the Veeam agent to VBR and then to a backup repository. But for the attached block storage, we're actually able to run storage snapshots against that, and then take that, effectively remove that load from the physical server and the Veeam agent that's installed on the physical server, and completely offload that backup capability onto Veeam, the Veeam infrastructure, and the backup storage as well. So again, just a brand new feature, a new way that we implement backup efficiency with DM and ONTAP. So again, this is only for Windows servers and failover clusters, and then you can read the specific other requirements here as well. I also want to talk about a new feature that we've added, probably not a ransomware specific feature, but a highly noteworthy feature that we wanted to make sure that applies to both Lenovo VX solutions and any kind of 3-tier Lenovo VMware solutions in general. And this feature is what we call continuous data protection. Now, if you've been familiar with Veeam for some time, we've had a replication capability in the product that allows you to effectively to do a snapshot based staging of a VM from vCenter A to vCenter B, and that VM is staged and ready to run and boot and go. And the RPO with that, we did advertise up to a 15-minute frequency. 15 minutes was hard to achieve for some workloads, particularly for very transactional workloads, because we were taking a VM snapshot every 15 minutes, and that was not always acceptable in terms of VM operations for some folks. And so, maybe our RPO was a little more realistic for the traditional VM replication capability we've had in VBR. The new capability is snapshot less. So there is no agent. This is all driven by the VMware VAIO API, where we effectively install an IO filter on the ESXi hosts that are in scope, and then we're effectively intercepting the IO that passes through there, and then consolidating and moving those IOs across the wire to affect the replication process. So this isn't since it's asynchronous. We don't have some of the physical distance and latency requirements that some synchronous replication technologies impose, and it is obviously, since we're intercepting data at the individual IO level, we of course don't care what the VM guest is. We're just simply intercepting blocks and sending them down the wire. Now, we don't expect that you would use this with all of your VMs. We in our minds, this is the top 5%. This is your mission critical transactional database server that runs your company e-commerce site or something similar. And this just gives you another option. There are great storage replication technologies that do this at the storage level, and those are perfectly fine. This is actually all at the VM level. So we actually unchain you, I guess, in some ways, because you can have some diversity in the platform on either end, and not be bound to any particular underlying storage technology. So the minimum, or the lowest, I guess, RPO is 2 seconds. So we're consolidating IOs for 1 second, and then using the second to replicate those IOs across the wire. And we can do both crash consistent and application consistent points, so that you can effectively tell your CDP policy to create a crash consistent state every 5 seconds, and then every hour create an application consistent state, and the failover and failback works just like you're used to it working with Veeam backup and replication for our traditional replication sorts of technology. So this is just a high level state of what the architecture looks like. I have a source cluster, I have a target cluster, I have our filter drivers are installed on the Veeam filter drivers installed on the ESXi hosts, and then we have a new brand of proxy called the CDP proxy, which allows you to run this sort of replication. And we actually have some built-in tools to estimate how much bandwidth you'll need, how many CPU cycles, and how much memory you'll need to run the CDP proxies there as well, which are pretty handy. So in terms of storage, we've actually added some new object level storage. In this case, Google Object Storage. So this is a brand new. So IBM Cloud, AWS, Azure, and now Google Object Storage are all supported for your capacity tiers for Veeam backup and replication. And then we've also added a new archive capability as well, so that if you are using, you're currently using AWS, you're currently using Azure, we're able to take those backups that you have in that capacity tier, and particularly for your long-term backups, move those into a cold storage tier. Now, do be aware that the requirement is right now it's Azure to Azure, AWS to AWS. We can't go from an on-prem, say Cloudian to Amazon Glacier. That's currently not supported. But if you're already Azure, already AWS, this is a great cost-saving mechanism for our customers. So I hope that's been helpful. I hope that's given you a good view of the multiple ways that we intersect with Lenovo technologies and your Lenovo Data Center. And I just encourage you, if you haven't used Veeam before, if you haven't tried it, it is very easy to get up and running. It is as simple as we say. I encourage you to download a copy from Veeam. We have a community edition. You don't need any licensing. We'll protect up to 10 workloads workloads, whether those are VMs or agents or limited NAS backup, just with a next sort of install. So with that, I'll pass it over to you, David.
All right, great presentation, Ron. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. I learned a lot about the new Veeam version 11 and especially how it can interface and work with Lenovo infrastructure as well. So great presentation. Thanks for taking time to show us the demo with the immutable Linux repository or the hardened Linux repository. So very cool stuff. I do want to remind everyone that you can enter your questions still there in the questions tab, and we'll route those over to Ron. But I know we're trying to keep this a short event, so let me go ahead and announce the winner of our Amazon $300 gift card. That's going to Steve Flatter from Wisconsin. Congratulations, Steve Flatter from Wisconsin. We'll reach out to you to deliver your gift card. Thank you, everyone, for joining us here on the event today. I hope that you have a great weekend. Take care, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.